Civil rights and social movements of the 1960s, the fight for racial equality and desegregation. The 1960s was a pivotal decade in American history, marked by profound social upheaval, activism, and a relentless struggle for civil rights. Central to this era was a fight of African Americans to achieve equality, dismantle institutionalized segregation, and secure their constitutional rights. This movement was driven by courageous individuals, grassroots organizations, legal battles, and mass protests that challenged centuries of systemic racism. The civil rights movement not only reshaped American society, but also inspired global struggles for justice and equality. Historical background: roots of racial discrimination. To understand the significance of the civil rights struggles in the 1960s, it is essential to recognize the deep-rooted history of racial discrimination in the United States. Following the end of Reconstruction in 1877, Southern states enacted Jim Crow laws, state and local statutes that mandated racial segregation in public facilities such as schools, transportation, housing, and public accommodations. These laws institutionalized the doctrine of separate but equal, which was often far from equal in practice. African Americans faced disenfranchisement through poll taxes, literacy tests, intimidation tactics like violence or threats, and complex registration procedures designed explicitly to exclude black voters. The legacy of slavery persisted through economic exploitation, social marginalization, and political disenfranchisement. Despite these oppressive conditions, black communities maintained resilience through cultural expression, community organization, and acts of resistance. The long history of racial injustice created a foundation upon which the civil rights movement would build. Early milestones: the road to mass mobilization. The 1950s set critical precedents for the civil rights movement. A landmark Supreme Court decision in 1954, Brown v. Board of Education, declared that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional because separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. This ruling overturned the Plessy v. Ferguson 1896 doctrine that had justified segregation for nearly 6 decades. Brown v. Board energized activists, but also provoked fierce resistance among segregationists who sought to maintain racial hierarchies. Following Brown's victory, black communities across the South began demanding desegregation in all areas of life. However, progress was slow and met with violent opposition. It became clear that legal victories alone were insufficient. Direct action was necessary to challenge entrenched social norms. The Montgomery bus boycott, a catalyst. One of the earliest and most significant events that galvanized national attention was the Montgomery bus boycott, 1955 to 1956. Sparked by Rosa Parks's arrest for refusing to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama, this boycott was organized by local leaders, including Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who emerged as a prominent figure advocating nonviolent resistance. The boycott lasted over a year, more than 381 days, and resulted in a Supreme Court ruling declaring segregation on public buses unconstitutional. It demonstrated that sustained economic pressure could challenge segregation laws effectively. The success of Montgomery inspired similar protests across the South and established Dr. King's leadership as a moral voice for nonviolent protest. The expansion of the civil rights movement, nonviolent protest, sit-ins, and legislative milestones. The rise of nonviolent resistance. Building on the success of the Montgomery bus boycott, civil rights leaders increasingly adopted nonviolent resistance as a core strategy. Inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's principles of peaceful protest in India, leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. emphasized love, patience, and moral high ground in confronting injustice. This approach aimed to appeal to the conscience of the American public and to expose the brutality and injustice of segregation. King's leadership was instrumental in organizing mass demonstrations that combined moral appeal with strategic action. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, founded in 1957 by King and other ministers, became a central organization promoting nonviolent activism across the South. The sit-ins and direct action campaigns. One of the most effective tactics employed during this period was the sit-in. The Greensboro sit-in movement began in February 1960, when 4 black college students sat at a segregated Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. Their peaceful protests sparked similar actions across the South, involving students who refused to leave segregated facilities until served or until authorities intervened. These sit-ins challenged segregation directly at points of social interaction and gained widespread media attention. They demonstrated that young people could mobilize effectively and that nonviolent resistance could disrupt social norms. Similarly, freedom rides emerged as a bold effort to challenge segregation on interstate bus routes. Initiated in 1961 by CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, and SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, interracial groups traveled through the Deep South to test compliance with Supreme Court rulings banning segregated bus facilities. Riders faced violent mobs, arrests, and threats, but persisted, drawing national attention to ongoing segregationist practices. Legal challenges and voter registration efforts. While protests drew attention to segregationist policies, activists also recognized that legal change was essential for lasting progress. Organizations like NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, launched campaigns to challenge discriminatory laws through litigation. A key focus was voter registration among African Americans in the South, an arduous process due to literacy tests, poll taxes, intimidation, and violence designed to suppress black voting rights. Activists organized freedom schools to educate potential voters about their rights and coordinated efforts to register black voters despite violent opposition. The 1961 Freedom Rides also aimed to challenge segregation in interstate travel facilities, legally mandated by Supreme Court rulings, but still widely ignored or defied in practice. Key legislation. Civil Rights Act of 1964. That also consideredly the mounting pressure from protests, legal battles, and media coverage culminated in landmark legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson on July 2, 1964. This comprehensive law prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin in employment practices, public accommodations, such as hotels and restaurants, and federally funded programs. The Civil Rights Act marked a turning point by establishing federal authority over discriminatory practices that had long been tolerated or ignored at state levels. It also empowered federal agencies to enforce these challenges and resistance. Despite legislative victories, resistance persisted fiercely in many parts of the country. White supremacist groups, like the Ku Klux Klan, intensified their violence against activists. Bombings of black churches and homes were common threats faced by civil rights workers. In some regions, particularly Alabama, segregationist governors like George Wallace openly defied federal orders. Police brutality against protesters became widespread. Notable incidents included violent suppression during marches or sit-ins. This resistance underscored that legal change alone was insufficient without broader societal transformation. It also highlighted internal divisions within the movement regarding strategies, some advocating for more militant approaches, while others remained committed to nonviolence. Major marches, internal dynamics, and cultural shifts. The Birmingham Campaign and the fight for voting rights. In 1963, Birmingham, Alabama, known for its entrenched segregation, became a focal point of civil rights activism. The Birmingham Campaign, organized by the SCLC and local activists, aimed to challenge segregation in public facilities and economic injustices. The campaign included sit-ins, marches, and boycotts designed to pressure local authorities into desegregating public spaces. One of the most iconic moments was the use of children in protests. On May 2, 1963, hundreds of young students participated in a mass march. Police responded with high-pressure water hoses and police dogs, images that shocked the nation and drew international condemnation. The brutal treatment of peaceful protesters highlighted the cruelty of segregationist policies and galvanized support for federal intervention. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Perhaps the most famous event of the era was the March on Washington on August 28, 1963. Organized by civil rights leaders, including A. Philip Randolph and Martin Luther King Jr., it drew over 250,000 people to the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. The march aimed to advocate for jobs, economic justice, and an end to racial discrimination. King's historic "I Have a Dream" speech became a defining moment of the movement, articulating a vision of racial harmony and equality rooted in hope and moral conviction. The march demonstrated the power of mass mobilization and helped build momentum for legislative change. Selma to Montgomery. Marches and Voting Rights Act. In early 1965, activists focused on securing voting rights through direct action. The Selma to Montgomery marches were organized to protest barriers like poll taxes and literacy tests that disenfranchised Black voters. The first attempt on March 7th, Bloody Sunday, ended in violent suppression when state troopers attacked peaceful marchers crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The televised brutality shocked viewers nationwide and prompted President Lyndon B. Johnson to push for federal voting rights legislation. This led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which prohibited racial discrimination in voting practices, a landmark achievement that significantly increased Black voter registration. Internal debates: violence versus nonviolence, integration versus Black power. Throughout these years, debates emerged within the movement about strategy and goals. While leaders like King championed nonviolent resistance and integration, others argued that African Americans needed to pursue more militant approaches or focus on Black self-determination. The rise of groups like Black Power, led by figures such as Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael, later Kwame Ture, reflected frustrations with slow progress and persistent inequality. They emphasized racial pride, economic self-sufficiency, and sometimes advocated for separatism rather than integration. This ideological shift created tensions within civil rights organizations, but also broadened the scope of activism, highlighting issues like economic inequality, police brutality, and cultural identity. Cultural shifts: music, art, media. The civil rights movement profoundly influenced American culture. Music played a vital role. Songs like "We Shall Overcome" became anthems of hope. Artists like Sam Cooke with "A Change Is Gonna Come" expressed longing for justice. Black writers, poets, filmmakers, and artists used their work to depict struggles against oppression and celebrate Black identity. The movement also inspired a new sense of pride among African Americans, a cultural awakening that challenged stereotypes and promoted self-awareness. Media coverage brought images of violence against protesters into living rooms across America and around the world, shaping public opinion about segregationist policies. International impact: Cold War context. The civil rights movement also had global implications during the Cold War era. As America promoted itself as a beacon of democracy while practicing racial discrimination at home, critics highlighted this hypocrisy internationally. African Americans' fight for equality became intertwined with anti-colonial struggles worldwide, particularly in Africa and Asia, where nations were gaining independence from colonial powers. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. received international recognition. His advocacy for nonviolence resonated with global liberation movements seeking justice. The U.S. government faced pressure both domestically and internationally to address racial inequality, a factor that contributed to legislative reforms but also exposed contradictions within American ideals. Part 4. The late 1960s, New Challenges and the Movement's Legacy. As the 1960s drew to a close, the civil rights movement faced new and complex challenges that reflected both progress and deep-seated frustrations within African American communities. Despite significant legislative victories, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, many Black Americans continued to experience economic hardship, racial discrimination, and social marginalization. These persistent inequalities led to widespread unrest and a re-evaluation of strategies within the movement. Urban riots and social unrest. By the mid-1960s, frustration with systemic inequality erupted into violent protests in many American cities. One of the most infamous was the Watts riots in Los Angeles in August 1965. Sparked by an incident involving a Black motorist and police officers, tensions quickly escalated into 6 days of chaos involving looting, arson, and clashes with law enforcement. The riots resulted in over 30 deaths, hundreds of injuries, and millions of dollars in property damage. Watts became a symbol of Black anger over economic disparity, police brutality, and lack of opportunities. Similar uprisings occurred in Detroit, the 1967 Detroit riot, Newark, 1967, and other urban centers. These disturbances revealed that despite legal gains, many Black Americans still felt excluded from economic prosperity and subjected to oppressive policing practices. The riots underscored that social change required addressing underlying economic inequalities alongside legal reforms. International impact: Cold War context. The civil rights movement also had global implications during the Cold War era. As America promoted itself as a beacon of democracy while practicing racial discrimination at home, critics highlighted this hypocrisy internationally. African Americans' fight for equality became intertwined with anti-colonial struggles worldwide, particularly in Africa and Asia, where nations were gaining independence from colonial powers. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. received international recognition. His advocacy for nonviolence resonated with global liberation movements seeking justice. The U.S. government faced pressure both domestically and internationally to address racial inequality, a factor that contributed to legislative reforms but also exposed contradictions within American ideals. Part 4. The Late 1960s. New Challenges and the Movement's Legacy. As the 1960s drew to a close, the civil rights movement faced new and complex challenges that reflected both progress and deep-seated frustrations within African American communities. Despite significant legislative victories, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, many Black Americans continued to experience economic hardship, racial discrimination, and social marginalization. These persistent inequalities led to widespread unrest and a re-evaluation of strategies within the movement. Urban riots and social unrest. By the mid-1960s, frustration with systemic inequality erupted into violent protests in many American cities. One of the most infamous was the Watts riots in Los Angeles in August 1965. Sparked by an incident involving a black motorist and police officers, tensions quickly escalated into 6 days of chaos involving looting, arson, and clashes with law enforcement. The riots resulted in over 30 deaths, hundreds of injuries, and millions of dollars in property damage. Watts became a symbol of Black anger over economic disparity, police brutality, and lack of opportunities. Similar uprisings occurred in Detroit, the 1967 Detroit riot, Newark, 1967, and other urban centers. These disturbances revealed that despite legal gains, many Black Americans still felt excluded from economic prosperity and subjected to oppressive policing practices. The riots underscored that social change required addressing underlying economic inequalities alongside legal reforms. Cultural Renaissance and Identity. During this period, there was also a cultural awakening among African Americans. The late 1960s saw a rise in Black pride movements, celebrating African heritage through music, such as soul music, art, literature, like the works of Amiri Baraka, and fashion. This cultural renaissance fostered a sense of identity rooted in history and resilience. Prominent figures like James Baldwin used their writings to critique racial injustice while inspiring pride among Black youth. The cultural shift helped challenge stereotypes perpetuated by mainstream media and fostered solidarity within Black communities. International impact. Cold War context. The civil rights struggles resonated globally during an era marked by decolonization and Cold War tensions. Many newly independent nations viewed America's racial discrimination as hypocritical given its claims to promote democracy worldwide. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., who received international recognition for his nonviolent approach, became symbols not only within America, but also abroad, especially among anti-colonial movements seeking justice against imperial powers. The international spotlight pressured U.S. policymakers to confront racial inequality more seriously, though progress remained slow, and highlighted contradictions between American ideals of freedom and reality at home. Legacy of the Civil Rights Movement. Although by the late 1960s many goals had been achieved legally, such as desegregation laws, the struggle for true equality continued beyond legislation. The movement laid a foundation for future activism across various social issues: gender equality, LGBTQ+ rights, economic justice, environmental activism, and ongoing fights against systemic racism. The movement demonstrated that sustained mass action could effect change when driven by moral conviction combined with strategic organization. It inspired generations worldwide to challenge injustice through protest, advocacy, education, and hope. Today's ongoing efforts for racial equity owe much to this pivotal era, a testament to resilience against adversity, and a reminder that social transformation requires persistent effort across generations. The Black Panther Party, one of the most influential and controversial revolutionary organizations in American history, was founded in 1966 in Oakland, California. The party emerged at a time when African Americans were still facing severe racial discrimination, economic injustice, and violent repression, especially from law enforcement agencies. The founders, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, created the party in response to these conditions, seeking to promote Black self-defense, empowerment, and community upliftment. The socio-political context of the 1960s played a crucial role in shaping the party's formation. Despite the gains of the civil rights movement, including landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, African Americans continued to suffer from systemic inequalities. Segregation, unemployment, poor housing conditions, and especially police brutality were pervasive in Black communities. Many activists believed that nonviolent protest alone was insufficient to address these deep-rooted problems. It was within this atmosphere of frustration and determination that the Black Panther Party was born. Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, two young African-American men from Oakland, were inspired by the ideas of Black nationalism and armed self-defense. Newton, who had been studying law and political theory, and Seale, who was deeply involved in grassroots organizing, came together to create a political organization that would protect African American neighborhoods from police violence and advocate for broader social and economic justice. Their founding of the Black Panther Party was announced publicly on October 15, 1966. One of the party's earliest activities was to conduct armed citizen patrols of the Oakland police, monitoring police behavior and challenging abuses. This was a direct response to frequent incidents of police brutality in Black neighborhoods. The sight of armed Black men patrolling the streets was provocative and controversial, drawing both support and intense opposition. The Panthers carried out these patrols openly, asserting their legal right to bear arms as guaranteed by the Second Amendment, and demanding that the police respect the rights of Black citizens. In addition to armed self-defense, the Black Panther Party developed a comprehensive platform known as the 10-Point Program. This document articulated the party's demands and vision for justice. It called for freedom, full employment, decent housing, education that reflected true Black history, an end to police brutality, and exemption of Black men from the military draft, among other rights. The program reflected a radical critique of American society and called for systemic change, not merely integration or incremental reform. Beyond their confrontational stance toward police and government institutions, the Panthers also focused heavily on community programs aimed at improving the material conditions of Black people. These included free breakfast programs for children, health clinics, educational initiatives, and efforts to combat food insecurity. These social programs were revolutionary in their own right and gained significant support within the communities the Panthers served. They demonstrated the party's commitment to practical improvements in everyday life and helped build a base of grassroots support. However, the Black Panther Party also attracted fierce opposition from local, state, and federal authorities. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, considered the Panthers a major threat to national security and launched extensive efforts to undermine the party through surveillance, infiltration, and disinformation campaigns. The COINTELPRO operation sought to create divisions within the party and to discredit its leaders. These tactics contributed to internal strife and weakened the organization over time. Despite these challenges, the Black Panther Party had a profound impact on the civil rights and Black Power movements. It redefined ideas about Black resistance, emphasizing self-defense and empowerment rather than nonviolence alone. The party's emphasis on community programs also influenced later movements that combined political activism with social services. In summary, the Black Panther Party was founded in 1966 as a response to the systemic racism, economic inequality, and police violence faced by African Americans. Its founders, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, created an organization that combined armed self-defense with a commitment to social programs and political education. The party's 10-point program laid out a radical vision for Black liberation and social justice. Though targeted and undermined by government repression, the Black Panther Party remains a powerful symbol of resistance and empowerment in American history. Huey P. Newton was born in 1942 in Monroe, Louisiana, into a family that experienced the harsh realities of the Jim Crow South. As a child, he moved with his family to Oakland, California, where he grew up in a predominantly Black working-class neighborhood. From a young age, Newton was aware of racial inequality and police violence against African Americans. He was a bright student and later attended Merritt College in Oakland, where he studied law and political theory. Newton became particularly interested in the writings of Marx, Lenin, Frantz Fanon, and Malcolm X, all of whom influenced his thinking about race, class, and revolutionary struggle. His knowledge of law helped him understand how the legal system was often used to oppress Black people, and reinforced his belief in the necessity of self-defense. Bobby Seale, born in 1936 in Dallas, Texas, also experienced the harshness of segregation in the South before moving to Oakland. He was active in the local community and deeply involved in grassroots organizing. Seale worked with the local NAACP and other civil rights groups, but was frustrated by their slow progress and emphasis on nonviolent protest. He sought a more direct approach to combating racial oppression. Seale's charismatic leadership and organizing skills were essential in mobilizing young Black people in Oakland. The two men met at Merritt College, where they shared a vision for creating a group that would empower Black communities to defend themselves and fight for justice. In October 1966, they officially founded the Black Panther Party for self-defense. The early days: armed patrols and confronting police brutality. One of the Black Panther Party's earliest and most notable tactics was the practice of armed citizen patrols. These patrols involved members following police officers in Black neighborhoods to observe their behavior and prevent abuses. At the time, police brutality was rampant in many Black communities, with officers frequently using excessive force, harassment, and even murder with little accountability. Newton and Seale believed that African Americans had the right to bear arms and defend themselves from violent policing, and they used California's open carry laws to legally carry guns during these patrols. The presence of armed Black men was a powerful statement of resistance and self-determination. It challenged the authority of the police and asserted the Panthers' commitment to protecting their communities. The armed patrols quickly attracted attention from both the public and law enforcement. Some viewed the Panthers as dangerous militants, while others saw them as necessary protectors. The police and government officials often responded with hostility and repression, escalating tensions and sometimes leading to violent clashes. The 10-point program: vision and demands. Central to the Black Panther Party's philosophy was the 10-point program, which outlined the organization's demands and vision for Black liberation. This program was a manifesto that expressed the grievances of African Americans and proposed radical solutions. The 10 points were: we want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our Black community. We want full employment for our people. We want an end to the robbery by the capitalists of our Black community. We want decent housing, fit for shelter of human beings. We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in present-day society. We want all Black men to be exempt from military service. We want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of Black people. We want freedom for all Black men held in federal, state, county, and city prisons and jails. We want all Black people, when brought to trial, to be tried in court by a jury of their peer group or people from their Black communities. We want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. This program was both a critique of systemic oppression and a blueprint for revolutionary change. It addressed economic justice, political representation, education reform, and an end to racial violence, capturing the broad scope of the Panthers' ambitions. While the party is often remembered for its militant stance and armed self-defense, the Panthers also prioritized practical initiatives that directly improved the lives of Black people in poor urban areas. The party's Free Breakfast for Children program was among the most successful and widely recognized efforts. Launched in 1969, this program provided free, nutritious breakfasts to school children in underserved neighborhoods. Many children in these areas faced food insecurity and came to school hungry, which negatively impacted their learning and development. The Panthers believed that a healthy body was essential for education and empowerment. At its peak, the breakfast program served thousands of meals every day across dozens of cities. In addition to food programs, the Panthers established free health clinics that offered basic medical services, testing for diseases such as sickle cell anemia and tuberculosis, and health education. These clinics helped fill gaps in the healthcare system that often ignored Black communities. The party also ran community schools focused on political education and Black history, aiming to foster pride and consciousness among young people. Other social initiatives included programs to provide clothing and legal aid, efforts to improve housing conditions, and campaigns against drugs and alcohol abuse in the community. These efforts reflected the Panthers' holistic approach to liberation. Political freedom could not be separated from economic and social well-being. The community programs helped build strong support for the party and demonstrated an alternative model of leadership rooted in service and solidarity. They also challenged prevailing stereotypes about Black activists by highlighting their commitment to constructive social change. Government repression and COINTELPRO. The FBI's war on the Panthers. The success and growing influence of the Black Panther Party made it a target for intense government surveillance and repression. The FBI, under its longtime director J. Edgar Hoover, viewed the Panthers as a major threat to national security and social order. Hoover famously described the party as the greatest threat to the internal security of the country. To neutralize the Panthers, the FBI launched COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program, a secret and illegal operation aimed at disrupting, discrediting, and dismantling Black activist organizations, including the Panthers. COINTELPRO employed a wide range of tactics. Infiltration. The FBI planted informants and undercover agents inside the party to sow distrust and gather intelligence. Disinformation. The FBI spread false rumors and propaganda to create divisions between party members and other civil rights groups. legal harassment. Panthers were frequently arrested on dubious charges, and many leaders faced long prison sentences. The FBI collaborated with local law enforcement to aggressively prosecute Panthers. Violence. In some cases, FBI informants and allied police forces were involved in violent confrontations that led to deaths of Panthers. One of the most infamous episodes was the 1969 raid on the Panthers' Oakland headquarters, during which party co-founder Huey Newton was shot and arrested, facing a highly publicized trial that galvanized supporters, but also exposed internal conflicts. The constant pressure from COINTELPRO and police harassment led to paranoia and factionalism within the party. Some members advocated for more militant actions, while others wanted to focus on community programs and political alliances. This internal tension, combined with external repression, contributed to the party's decline in the 1970s. National expansion and influence. After its founding in Oakland, the Black Panther Party quickly expanded beyond California, establishing chapters in major cities across the United States, including New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Seattle. The spread was fueled by a shared experience of racial oppression and economic hardship faced by black communities nationwide. The party's message of self-defense, black pride, and community empowerment resonated widely. The Panthers adapted their programs to local conditions, but the core principles remained the same: armed self-defense, political education, and social services. For example, the New York chapter became known for its community health clinics and legal aid efforts, while the Chicago chapter was heavily involved in organizing tenants' rights and confronting police brutality. The party also began forging alliances with other marginalized groups and leftist organizations. They supported the struggles of Native Americans, Latinos, poor white communities, and international liberation movements. The Panthers saw their struggle as part of a global fight against imperialism, colonialism, and capitalism. Nationally, the Black Panther Party gained significant media attention, both positive and negative. They used newspapers like the Black Panther, the party's official publication, to spread their ideas, report on police violence, and highlight community programs. The newspaper was a crucial tool for communication and organizing, reaching tens of thousands of readers. Key leaders beyond Newton and Seal. While Huey Newton and Bobby Seale were the founders, many other individuals played important roles in the party's development and activities. Eldridge Cleaver was one of the most prominent early members and served as the party's Minister of Information. Cleaver was a charismatic speaker and writer whose 1968 book, Soul on Ice, brought national attention to the Panthers. He advocated for militant revolution, but later split from the party over ideological differences. Kathleen Cleaver, Eldridge's wife, was a key organizer and spokesperson. She was one of the few women in the party's leadership and helped shape its public image. Fred Hampton, leader of the Chicago chapter, was known for his ability to build coalitions across racial and ethnic lines. He organized the Rainbow Coalition, bringing together Black, Latino, and white activist groups. Hampton's assassination by police in 1969 was a major blow to the movement and highlighted the deadly repression the Panthers faced. Angela Davis, though not a formal member, was closely associated with the Panthers and the broader Black Power movement. Her activism, scholarship, and imprisonment brought international focus to issues of race, justice, and prison reform, legacy, and cultural impact. Despite the decline of the Black Panther Party by the early 1980s, its legacy endures in many ways. The party transformed the discourse on race and resistance in America. It challenged the notion that Black Americans should respond passively to oppression and instead emphasized pride, self-determination, and militant self-defense. This shift influenced later movements, such as the 1990s hip-hop culture, which often drew on Panther imagery and rhetoric. The Panthers' community programs set a precedent for grassroots activism, combining social services with political organizing. Many contemporary organizations that address food insecurity, healthcare access, and education in marginalized communities trace their roots to the Panther model. The party also had a lasting impact on law enforcement reforms and the national conversation around police brutality. The issues the Panthers raised remain highly relevant today in movements like Black Lives Matter. Culturally, the Panthers became symbols of Black empowerment and resistance, their iconic black berets and leather jackets instantly recognizable. Their story has been told and retold in books, films, music, and art, continuing to inspire new generations. The rise and national attention, key events and milestones. After its founding in 1966, the Black Panther Party rapidly gained attention through several high-profile incidents and programs. One early landmark was the arrest and trial of Huey Newton in 1967. Newton was arrested after a confrontation with Oakland police that left one officer dead and Newton wounded. The trial was highly publicized and became a rallying point for supporters who saw Newton as a victim of political persecution. His conviction was eventually overturned, but the case exposed the tensions between law enforcement and Black activists. The Panthers also became known for their police patrols, which they conducted openly with firearms, as allowed by California law at the time. These patrols were intended to deter police violence, but they also challenged traditional power dynamics in a racially segregated America. The public visibility of armed Black citizens was shocking to many and created both support and fear. In 1968, the Panthers broadened their focus to include international solidarity. They expressed support for liberation movements around the world, including in Vietnam, Cuba, and African nations fighting colonialism. This global perspective connected the Panthers to a broader anti-imperialist struggle. The decline, internal struggles, and government crackdowns. Despite early successes, the Black Panther Party began to fracture by the early 1970s. Several factors contributed to its decline. Internal conflicts, ideological differences, leadership disputes, and disagreements over tactics caused tensions within the party. Some members favored continuing militant actions, while others wanted to focus more on community service and political alliances. These conflicts sometimes resulted in violent confrontations within the party. Government repression. COINTELPRO's relentless campaign severely weakened the Panthers. Informants sowed distrust among members, and police raids frequently targeted Panther offices and leaders. Key figures were imprisoned or killed, including Fred Hampton, whose 1969 assassination by Chicago police remains one of the most infamous examples of state violence against Black activists. Legal battles. Many Panthers faced long legal battles on charges ranging from illegal possession of weapons to conspiracy. These trials drained resources and morale. The most famous case was the Chicago 8 trial, later Chicago 7, involving activists charged with conspiracy and inciting riots at the 1968 Democratic National Convention. Though not all were Panthers, this trial was emblematic of the broader government crackdown on radical activists. Media portrayal. The mainstream media often portrayed the Panthers as violent extremists, which alienated some potential supporters and justified harsh government responses. By the mid-1970s, the party's membership had dwindled, and its influence declined significantly. Legal battles and political trials. Throughout its existence, the Black Panther Party was embroiled in numerous legal battles that reflected the broader political struggle over civil rights and state power. The Huey Newton trial became a cause célèbre for many activists, with accusations of racial bias and judicial unfairness. Newton was initially convicted of manslaughter, but won an appeal. His legal struggles symbolized the broader fight against systemic racism in the justice system. Other leaders, like Bobby Seale, were famously involved in the Chicago 8 trial. Seale's dramatic courtroom outbursts, including being bound and gagged by the judge, drew international condemnation and highlighted the tensions between radical activists and the government. Many Panthers were convicted on charges widely seen as politically motivated, and international campaigns for their release gained support from activists worldwide. The role of women in the Black Panther Party. Although often overshadowed by the male leadership, women played a crucial and transformative role in the Black Panther Party. Women were deeply involved in organizing, community programs, and political education, and many became prominent leaders in their own right. In the early days, the party was male-dominated, but women quickly became essential to its operations. Figures such as Eldridge Cleaver's wife, Kathleen Cleaver, and Assata Shakur, who later became a symbol of resistance after escaping prison and fleeing to Cuba, were influential voices. Women organized the free breakfast programs, health clinics, and educational classes, which became the heart of the party's community work. Women also contributed to the Panthers' political philosophy, emphasizing the intersections of race, class, and gender oppression. Female members challenged patriarchal attitudes within the party and broader society, pushing for greater gender equality and recognition of women's contributions. The presence of women helped shape the party's more inclusive and community-oriented approach, and their leadership challenged traditional gender roles in the Black liberation movement. Community programs as a model of revolutionary social services. The Black Panther Party's community programs were not just charity. They were part of a revolutionary strategy to build autonomous Black communities. By addressing basic needs such as food, healthcare, and education, the Panthers aimed to reduce dependency on the state and capitalist institutions that had historically neglected Black people. Their Free Breakfast for Children program became a national model, inspiring similar initiatives by churches and other organizations. The party's health clinics were among the first to offer culturally sensitive care in underserved neighborhoods, including testing for sickle cell anemia, a disease disproportionately affecting Black Americans. The Panthers also advocated for Black-owned businesses and cooperatives as a way to build economic self-sufficiency. Their programs highlighted the importance of practical support alongside political activism. The cultural impact of the Black Panther Party. The Panthers helped shape Black identity and culture in profound ways. They popularized images of Black pride, afros, Black leather jackets, and berets became symbols of resistance and self-respect. The party's rhetoric and style influenced the emerging Black Power movement and later cultural expressions in music, fashion, and art. Hip-hop artists from Public Enemy to Kendrick Lamar have cited the Panthers as a major influence, drawing on their themes of resistance and empowerment. Films and documentaries about the party have helped preserve their story and educate new generations. The Panthers also helped change the narrative around Black Americans, from victims of oppression to active agents fighting for justice and equality. Final thoughts: a complex and enduring legacy. The Black Panther Party's history is marked by both extraordinary achievements and significant challenges. They faced violent repression, internal divisions, and public misunderstanding, yet their impact continues to be felt today. Their insistence on self-defense and community control challenged the status quo and expanded the possibilities for political activism. Their programs demonstrated how social services and political liberation could be combined effectively. As contemporary movements confront ongoing issues of racial injustice, economic inequality, and police violence, the Black Panther Party's legacy offers both inspiration and caution. Their story reminds us that social change requires courage, organization, and a willingness to confront power directly. Would you like me to provide more detailed biographies, specific events like the assassination of Fred Hampton, or a breakdown of their interactions with other movements and political groups? Just let me know. The assassination of Fred Hampton, a turning point. One of the most tragic and defining moments in the history of the Black Panther Party was the assassination of Fred Hampton, the charismatic chairman of the Illinois chapter and deputy chairman of the National Party. Fred Hampton was only 21 years old, but had already distinguished himself as a brilliant organizer, a compelling speaker, and a unifying force. He was instrumental in forming the Rainbow Coalition, an alliance that brought together Black Panthers, Puerto Rican activists, the Young Lords, white working-class revolutionaries, the Young Patriots, and other marginalized groups in Chicago. His ability to build solidarity across racial and ideological lines posed a serious threat to the existing power structure. On December 4, 1969, in a pre-dawn raid, Chicago police officers stormed the apartment where Hampton was sleeping. The raid was orchestrated with intelligence provided by an FBI informant who had infiltrated Hampton's inner circle. The police fired nearly 100 shots. Hampton was killed in his bed. Another Panther, Mark Clark, was also killed, and several others were seriously wounded. The killing of Fred Hampton was widely viewed as an assassination, not a shootout. Later investigations revealed the extent of FBI involvement and exposed the tactics used to silence political dissidents under COINTELPRO. Hampton's death shocked the world and galvanized even more resistance, but it also had a devastating effect on the momentum and morale of the movement. With the civil rights movement, the Panthers respected leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but believed that nonviolent resistance alone was insufficient. While King advocated for integration, the Panthers demanded liberation and self-determination, often accusing liberal reformists of being too compromising. With the Nation of Islam, the Panthers had ideological disagreements with the Nation of Islam, especially regarding religion and gender roles. The Panthers were secular Marxists, while the Nation was rooted in religious doctrine.
14.1.
As the profession remain, Osmecha Bakali of Dr. Management. However, both groups supported Black empowerment and economic independence. With white leftists, the Panthers were open to alliances with white radicals and socialists, such as the Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, and the Weather Underground. They emphasized that capitalism, not just racism, was the root of oppression, and that poor people of all races could unite against common enemies. With global movements, internationally, the Panthers expressed solidarity with revolutionary movements in Vietnam, Algeria, Cuba, China, and South Africa. They saw themselves as part of a global struggle against colonialism and imperialism. The Panthers even opened an international chapter in Algiers, where Eldridge Cleaver and others operated in exile.
From its inception, the Black Panther Party was one of the most heavily surveilled and persecuted political groups in U.S. history. The FBI's COINTELPRO program used illegal surveillance, forged documents, disinformation, and infiltrators to destabilize the party. Panthers were arrested en masse, often on false charges, forcing chapters to divert time and energy to legal defense. Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, and other high-profile members were frequently imprisoned. Legal defense became a massive undertaking. In some cities, more Panthers were in jail than on the street. Trials were drawn out and expensive, and many of them were politically motivated. One notable case involved Assata Shakur, who was arrested, tried, and later escaped from prison before receiving political asylum in Cuba. The Panthers' international reach and revolutionary diplomacy. In the early 1970s, especially after Eldridge Cleaver fled the U.S. following a shootout with police, the Black Panther Party made significant efforts to internationalize its struggle. Cleaver established the international section of the Black Panther Party in Algiers, Algeria, where the Panthers opened an embassy and worked with representatives of liberation movements from Vietnam, Palestine, and African independence struggles. The International Panthers emphasized anti-imperialist unity and began corresponding with revolutionary governments like North Korea, China, and Cuba. This global diplomacy provided moral support, but it also made the Panthers an even greater target of U.S. surveillance and counterintelligence. The party's fragmentation and transformation. By the mid-1970s, the Black Panther Party was a shadow of its former self. Several factors contributed to this. Intense government repression had decimated the leadership. Internal ideological splits, particularly between Huey Newton and Eldridge Cleaver, had divided the party into factions. Local chapters became isolated, each taking on different characteristics and priorities without centralized leadership. Public support declined, especially as negative media portrayals painted the party as violent and dangerous, despite their community work. In 1974, Newton disbanded many chapters and attempted to turn the party into a more community-oriented electoral force based in Oakland. The Panthers even ran candidates for local office and won. Elaine Brown, one of the most powerful female leaders in the party, briefly served as the chairwoman and focused on educational and housing programs in Oakland. However, by 1982, the national organization officially disbanded. Many of its leaders were dead, in prison, in exile, or had moved on to other causes.